what would you say has aided in your healing or in the advocacy you're involved with? Have such things as the arts or mindfulness or storytelling, or has there been anything else that has been a really useful tool in being able to bring you to that place?
I'd say the number one thing, and probably the most stigmatized thing, is counseling. I was put into counseling at a very young age. Children don't have the tools to self-regulate their emotions in a normal childhood. So art has been very therapeutic for me. I'm sure it was great as a child too. It probably seemed like a fun activity, but it's also healing in a sense. And meeting other children that had lost parents in 9/11, and let's say doing that through art or through games was like a great medium to do so. Storytelling has also been really healing for me, to tell my story and connect with others who share their story. It's been healing, and it's advocating for the 9/11 community has been healing, because it's putting the grief and the feelings to action, and fighting for the justice and accountability that I'm still fighting for now as an adult, almost 25 years later. So that in itself is healing, and sharing about my dad and who he was, and why his actions that day were so important.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, today we remember and honor the victims and survivors of terrorism. We pay tribute to those whose lives were stolen by terrorism, and we stand in solidarity with those who continue to live with the pain, loss, and trauma. This International Day is not only one of remembrance, it's a reaffirmation of our collective commitment to uphold the rights, dignity, and voices of victims everywhere. The United Nations Global Counter-Terrorist Strategy recognizes the vital role of victims in countering the appeal of terrorism.
Following is a collaboration between betsandbadges.com, SEFF.org.uk, and the Connecting Minds Project.org. August 21st was declared Day of Remembrance of Victims and Survivors of Terrorist Acts by the United Nations. On that day, Tim Donaldson, the Executive Director of SEFF.org.uk, hosted and moderated this panel of victims and survivors, where they explain the impact of terrorist acts on them, their lives, and their communities. I hope you'll embrace what they have to say and join us in our fight against global terrorism. Thank you.
Introducing Voices for Peace, from victimhood to leadership. And today, of course, we mark a very special day, the UN Day of Remembrance for Victims of Terrorism. To spotlight the lived experiences of victims and survivors and advocates from Northern Ireland, the UK, Spain and the United States, showcasing how their personal stories of trauma have transformed into public leadership, healing and cross-community peace building. This episode affirms the role of storytelling, remembrance and resilience in strengthening communities and nurturing a culture of peace. So I'd very much like to welcome our panellists here today and to acknowledge this very special day, UN Day of Remembrance for Victims of Terrorism. Today we are indeed joined by individuals whose lives were forever changed by violence, but who have chosen to become voices for peace, education and healing. So we have Inigo Pascaul Ramos, a victim educator in Spain, and his father, Angel, was murdered by ETA. We have Ines Gaviria in support today from the organisation COVITE. We're then joined also by Juliette Scauso, daughter of FDNY firefighter Dennis Scauso, killed in 9/11, and who is now a medical student and advocate for justice and peace. And finally, we're joined with Darryn Frost, QGM, London Bridge terror attack responder, who is now a justice reform advocate. You're all very welcome to the programme today.
Thank you very much.
Folks, we're first going to speak about the very difficult issue of living with the loss. And the purpose, I guess, of this section is to honour the lasting impact of trauma and to explore how you as individuals have lived your lives in spite of those experiences. So I'll first go to Juliette, if you don't mind. Can you share how your experience of terrorism or violence impacted your life and family?
Anybody that has been affected by trauma or violence can attest to the fact that it changes your entire life. Life will never be the same pre-event. For me, I lost my dad when I was quite young, so that reality shift happened very early on in my life, and that has been my reality ever since. So it's hard to have known anything different. Grief is not something that's linear, and it's hard to understand that if you haven't gone through it, but it's something that ebbs and flows and rears its ugly head at different milestones in your life. So for me, some of the hardest periods have been the bigger milestones: birthdays, getting your driver's license, finishing university, graduations. And for me, the big one, like moving abroad to pursue my dream of becoming a doctor. And I do know my father would be so incredibly proud, but at the same time, it's hard to not have that parent there to even just call up for guidance. But yeah, it rips an entire hole through your family dynamic, even your sense of self. It changes the way you view the world, the way you view things. I have such a different awareness of his absence, and a different awareness that life is fleeting, and the time we have with the people we love and doing the things we love is not guaranteed, and it's short. So I think I've tried to funnel my grief and my trauma into something productive and for something that can help other victims. And I've been lucky enough to have met other victims through that journey and become part of a very supportive and loving community.
Thank you, Gia. And I suppose you've touched on it there, but there obviously are times that are particularly difficult. And for you, what would you say would remain the hardest part of carrying those experiences forward, both personally and publicly? So what are you faced with? And I appreciate what you've said, that it can change from one day to the next. Mm-hmm. But are there some factors or themes around you that have a particular impact?
It's a difficult question, because your grief can be triggered by anything, something that might be symbolic for you or your family. Every milestone is difficult, and it will continue to be difficult for the day, for the rest of my life. Even something as simple as like not having your dad there when you walk down the aisle one day, or him getting to see me work as a doctor and add that MD to the Scauso name. It fluctuates, but the biggest, I'd say, challenge with my experience is the fact that we still haven't obtained justice and accountability for what happened. And so I was a child at the time, but now as an adult, I'm actually having to, get put to work to fight for that. And it's it can be re-traumatizing, and it gets tiring. It was almost 25 years ago, but the victims of any tragedy can probably agree with me here, but the 9/11 community, we live 9/11 every single day. It's our reality every single day, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't even just think about my dad in passing or think about what happened. It's a trauma that's relived constantly. So I think the most difficult challenge probably as a child was the fact that my loss was so public and it was so politicized. So there's no ability to grieve privately, and there's no closure because his body was never found. The people who were responsible for, arranging and funding these attacks are still operating business in the U.S. with our government, and they're operating on U.S. soil with complete impunity. We still don't have a lot of answers of what happened that day. And, I don't have a grave to go to. The grave, or the place that my father took his last breath is, it's a beautiful, solemn memorial, but at the same time, it's a tourist site. I go there to grieve and feel connection with my father, and people go there to take selfies. And it's a very difficult thing to explain to somebody who's not walked that path.
Thank you so much, Juliette, for sharing that. And Darryn, could I ask you the same question if you wanted to merge those couple of points, and maybe to speak to as well? I'm conscious that within your work now, you're forever campaigning, and that idea of space and where the incident happened in your case, and maybe your requirement to pass by that particular stretch, or is it something that you have tried to avoid? If you want to give some insight into how events have unfolded for you.
Yeah, so it's strange how a moment can change the course of your life. For me, it very much did. And in the beginning, it was in a destructive manner. So I was only ever able to see flashbacks. I was struggling with my memory, and life was very difficult. Even choosing to live was difficult. There was survivor's guilt. There was difficulties managing my emotions. It was a horrendous place to be. But after therapy and meeting others within the victim and survivor community, you find strength, you find your purpose, and you realize that you can help others who unfortunately will go through those same dark places. And it's finding that purpose, that sense of there will be other people who need to know that they will get through it too, and being there for them. And also helping other people who are struggling or misfortunate in their lives. And I've gone down the route of helping to accommodate prison leavers who would otherwise be homeless. And I find so much purpose from that. And whilst experiencing a terror event is a horrific thing, there are some incredible things that can come from it. And I think about the Manchester Arena bombing. If you walk around Manchester now, you'll see so many bees and a community that is closer knit than any other I've ever been to. And that's because they felt attacked as a community, and it brought them all closer together. Mm. So there are these strange things where these horrendous things can bring us closer together as a community. So I found those bits difficult, and I find it as a duty to try and campaign for the things that are right through my own experiences of the difficulties accessing care, mental health support, and hearing the struggles of others. That's what I campaign for, is to prevent that from happening to anyone else. And I'm proud to say that the government that have come into power have committed to the Survivors Charter, that's Survivors Against Terror, a charity that I campaign with, has proposed, and that sets in stone the minimum requirements for government to provide to survivors, or victims and survivors of terror. And I'm fiercely proud of that work.
Thank you, Darryn, and look, rightly so. I think that all of you as campaigners in your respective nations have made real change that's going to mean that the experience for others will be an improvement from what you yourselves had to go through, and that's very important. Inigo, if I turn to you now in terms of your experiences of terrorism or violence and how it's impacted yourself and also your family, and what's the hardest aspect of all of that?
Yeah, well, my father was
the top manager of a nuclear plant in Spain, and he was the leader of the family. So we all live in an umbrella behind him. So when he was murdered in 1982, I discovered that I had to take this leadership, and I was not prepared because I was so young. I was a teenager, 17 years old. So I had to fight in my life to become the leader, but also to find my own way. And it was very hard for me. So for many years, 4 years, I couldn't manage to work with both things. So life became more and more difficult until as you know, I tried to suicide. So my family was in a certain way destroyed when this happened. And I saw so many pain around me that I think is the hardest I have lived during my experience as a victim of terrorism.
Thank you so much, Inigo. And could I maybe ask Ines if you'd like to also contribute some of the themes that you've saw across other victims and survivors in COVITE and the hardest aspects in dealing with life as a terror victim?
Thank you, Kenny. Well, I am not a victim of terrorism myself, but I've lived in San Sebastian my whole childhood. And San Sebastian is the city in Spain behind Madrid that has been most hard hit by terrorism, particularly by terrorism of ETA. 99 people were killed there in a very small town, actually. So when I go back home and I walk through the streets, I know exactly where murders were committed. And for me, it's very incredible to walk down those streets and think of all the wrong things that have happened there, and to see the streets right now packed of tourists. And San Sebastian is a very beautiful city, so everyone that goes there is like, wow, this is such an incredible city, so beautiful, food is incredible, but very little people know all the horrible things that have happened there, And that has always caught my attention a lot. And since I started working in COVITE and I started knowing all the stories of the victims, of the families of the victims that were murdered there, I just find it incredible that they were killing the neighbors and no one did anything to stop that, And we were all mixed up together, like the families of the terrorists with the families of the victims. Some families of victims lived in the same building as their own perpetrators, and I think that's what's most incredible for me. Like so much evil was going on in such a small place, and the lack of freedom that people who were not supporting that had. Because they took the streets, they were like violence in the streets, they were burning everything, and the people who lived there, they just assumed that was the normal thing. That and me myself, I remember like when I was little, I wasn't allowed to go to certain areas because we knew that there was going to be violent strikes over there, and yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but
Well, thank you. And I think the theme I'm hearing there as well is the intimacy of space where things happen and how that space is then viewed by the victim versus outsiders to a situation, and how they act in that environment, and how that can be very difficult. So everyone, we've heard stories of deep loss and yet also of incredible strength across our panelists. These are not just memories of the past, but the foundations of something more: personal transformation and also public service. I'm now going to touch on the area of building resilience and peace. And the purpose of this particular section is to explore how survivors support others through education, the arts, and community healing. And the core focus of our question this time round is mental health. So if you're happy, I would propose to bring in Juliette and Inigo on this particular question, and then I'll bring in Darryn in the next question. So, Inigo, when working with young people, and I know you're an educator, how can we help them understand not only the events that shaped your lives, but also the emotional resilience it takes to keep moving forward?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kenny. It took me a long time to speak about what had happened in my life. A long time. I mean that it took me a long time to discover that my pain should pass and I had to recover. And I discovered also that to speak my story to people helped me. And they invite me to the first time to go to a school in Pamplona, in my city, where I spoke to 40 or 50 young people between 15 and 16 years old. And the first thing that I remember is all their faces. The faces were absolutely quiet, absolutely friendship, absolutely comprehension. They told me they were children that couldn't stand more than half an hour without talking with each other, and they stood 2 hours with saying anything. And in the end, they told me a lot of questions. I think those stories where a people is nearly the end of his life and can recover is also a story that help young people to improve. Okay.
Thank you. And the same question, Julia, could you, any experience or interaction you've had with younger people and your impression in how, you have been able to communicate your experiences to them as a very young woman yourself, and how they have been able to relate or not to relate with you and the different methods you use in doing so?
I think when I share my story, if I'm sharing it with a younger person or somebody that was alive during 9/11, I wouldn't say I tailor it towards an audience or I change my story. I mean, the facts of what I lived are the facts of what I lived. But I think educating people, particularly the younger generations, is so important. Not just the series of events of what happened on 9/11 or other tragedies, but the human impact of that, and that these people aren't just names, they're not just statistics. Even the generational effect that these losses had, the historical effects. I mean, how many laws and the way we travel changed after 9/11, like the real impact of these events. And I think education is also so imperative to make sure that generations don't repeat the same mistakes and these events don't repeat themselves. For me, it's really important to humanize my dad in a way that people just understand, because you see a first responder and you see the dramatic photos of them holding up the flag and or them running into the towers, and yes, that was the reality. But at the same time, my dad was an ordinary guy from Brooklyn. He lived off black coffee and he had 4 kids at home and he could fix anything. He was a normal person with dreams, and that was all taken away, and it was taken away from all of us. Like, the life I would have lived with him is gone. I think it's also important to educate people that grief is not a linear thing and trauma doesn't disappear, and to how do I explain this? To show people that, you can face adversity and take it in your stride and pivot it into something positive to help others. That there's, people are resilient. You can move forward. I carry my loss with me every day, but I think it's just kids these days are, they're all the kids currently even studying at university, they weren't born when 9/11 happened. And I don't think we're teaching about it the way we should. And it's definitely the same for the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It's the same for a lot of tragedies. Education is so important. And I think young people are owed to be taught about these events and to be taught them in an unbiased viewpoint, so that they can form their own opinions on it. And I think it's a really important thing. I don't know if I answered your question there, but...
No, you have indeed. Thank you. And I suppose as well, what would you say has aided in your healing or in the advocacy you're involved with? Have such things as the arts or mindfulness or storytelling, or has there been anything else that has been a really useful tool in being able to bring you to that place?
I'd say the number one thing, and probably the most stigmatized thing, is counseling. I was put into counseling at a very young age. Children don't have the tools to self-regulate their emotions in a normal childhood, let alone comprehending death, not only death, but murder, and on such a grand scale. My dad was there one day and it wasn't the next. And how do you just comprehend that somebody's gone? So art has been very therapeutic for me. I'm sure it was great as a child too. It probably seemed like a fun activity, but it's also healing in a sense. And meeting other children that had lost parents in 9/11, and let's say doing that through art or through games was like a great medium to do so. Storytelling has also been really healing for me, to tell my story and connect with others who share their story. It's been healing, and it's advocating for the 9/11 community has been healing, because it's putting the grief and the feelings to action, and fighting for the justice and accountability that I'm still fighting for now as an adult, almost 25 years later. So that in itself is healing, and sharing about my dad and who he was, and why his actions that day were so important.
Thank you. Darryn, I'm going to come to you on this question, but reframe it a little bit, because I understand obviously your focus and your work is very much about getting in early in terms of young people and trying to have some impact on their life's direction. So from your perspective, when you would work with young men in particular, as I understand, how can we help them understand the events that have shaped your lives, your life, but also the emotional resilience it takes to keep moving forward? And how do you sort of instill within them the abilities to take ownership for issues and to make their own decisions, if you like, to live as full a life as they can live?
Thanks, Kenny. Young men can be challenging. There's a lot of things going on, but I think one of the key things that I do is I'm vulnerable in front of them. I allow myself not to put up the macho bravado. I don't try and impress with any of that. They learn the story of what happened on the bridge, and I let them know that I was broken. It broke me, and it is okay to be broken, and you can build from that. And then I try and create a safe space for them to be who they are, to reflect on their past, identify that some things that have happened to them may well have been horrendous, unfair, unjust, but they have a choice on how they respond. Whether you're a victim or not, the one thing you do have is the power to decide how you want to live your life. And sometimes people need to be informed of that, and then just given a bit of guidance and support. I also let them know that I never had the best upbringing. I had some challenging times. But then I also do one other thing, is I try and remove blame. So when I look at my incident with the terrorist and the loss, I try and remove blame and look at the context, understand the situations and potentially the mindset of those people causing harm, and saying, what could we do to prevent that in future? And I think that's really helpful. So between being honest, open, providing a safe area, allowing myself to be vulnerable and share my own intimate stories builds trust. And I think that's the starting blocks with any young person, is letting them know that you're authentic, you don't have an agenda, and you're there for their best interests. Because a lot of them come into it really skeptical, thinking that you're trying to push your views on them.
Yes. I appreciate that answer, Darryn, and I suppose it would be so easy to fall into the camp of being viewed as officialdom, that essentially you're there almost as a judgmental role in seeking to, I suppose, give them a difficult time around what they have gone, what they have been involved with, but not necessarily providing the roadmap in conjunction with them for a better life. So appreciate very much what you've said there. And just to come to yourself as well, Inigo, in terms of anything that you have done within your life which has aided your healing and indeed the advocacy. And I know this morning you spoke about your involvement with COVITE and how that brought about a significant change, but also anything else that you do within your private time that really aids and helps you.
Yeah, that's true. After suffering so many times, maybe more than 10 years, I discovered that helping people was what helped me more. Do you understand? I mean, when I talk to people and I discover that I have reached their brain and I have put a light inside their brain, that's wonderful for me. And sometimes many people ask me questions that also make me a light in my brain. So I would say that all this kind of be good with other people is what makes me better person and makes me feel better. In COVITE we work with victims that still are fighting with their pains. So if I can't find a word or just a listening to help them is what I try. Thank you, Kenny.
Okay, and as we've heard there, folks, resilience isn't only personal, it becomes a bridge to others, and through each of your work you're helping the next generation navigate the complexities of memory, identity and peace. Our next segment is then looking at this whole issue of from victimhood to leadership and examining how personal grief can lead to public action and meaningful leadership. And I want to come to you first on this one, Ines, because I know there is a model that exists within COVITE around trying to empower victims and survivors to become them self-advocates within that organisation and to publicly project the principles that it's an organisation with limited staffing resources but a huge voluntary input from people. So could I ask how victims and survivors connected with COVITE would have transformed their experiences into advocacy or service?
Thank you, Kenny, for the question. In order to answer it correctly, I think I'm going to start with giving context of when COVITE was founded and why. COVITE was founded in the Basque Country, which is where the main problem with terrorism was in Spain, in 1998, which was a context of negotiations for a peace process in the Basque Country. And in that peace process, the victims had no place. They were not mentioned, no one was taking into consideration their rights to justice and truth. They were all, like all the, let's say, public figures, the media, everyone was putting pressure on them that it was time for them to move on. Like, it's now we're going to achieve peace, so you just have to forget everything that happened and, like, don't get in the way of peace. That was like the mainstream speech in the Basque Country at that moment. And so victims felt completely forgotten and felt even like humiliated in the sense that, like, of course we want peace, but we don't want peace at the price that is so high that we become victims of peace as well. And so the 200 families who were gathered that day that COVITE was founded in 1998, that was their main message. We don't want to become victims of peace. Like, peace cannot be at the high price of impunity, not forgiveness, like everything that it should be forgotten, and we have to act as if anything happened here. And in doing that, and in finding the voice to be able to advocate for their rights, I think that it has, they have achieved a voice in the public space, and they have advocated for their rights. And maybe if that wasn't done, the situation would be so much worse. And also what they said was, like, don't get too excited that there's going to be peace so soon, because, we are dealing with criminals here and they might be lying. And in fact, it proved to be true, because ETA continued killing for another 12 years, more or less. And so that's what I think that helps the victims in advocating for the rights in the public space, because if they didn't do it, I don't think that not politicians, no one else would do it. So they had to learn to do it for themselves, and that is also a way of feeling, a part of a community and supporting each other and feeling understood and not alone. And I mean, I'm not a victim myself, so I cannot speak of how that feels, but I think it's important when you've suffered such big trauma to not feel alone. So I think that's the important thing that we achieve in COVITE.
Kenneth. And can I come to Darryn? So how you've transformed your experiences into advocacy or service, and that idea of reclaiming control perhaps comes in there.
Yeah, well, I found it really interesting to see how after a terror incident, government would implement new legislation, new rules to their own agenda. And they said, we're doing this for victims because victims want justice, victims want X or Y. And it really upset me, because I was thinking, I've met a lot of victims, and what most victims want is no more victims. That's what they primarily want above everything else. And so it really upset me. And so finding Survivors Against Terror as a charity was the perfect vehicle for that advocacy. It had just started up. I looked for support as a terror victim online, and I couldn't find anything in the UK at all, except for this fledgling charity called Survivors Against Terror. And that was set up by other survivors. Much like COVITE, it's a very similar thing. And through that, I met amazing people, and I saw the strength in those who've survived terror incidents, or the families of those who were killed in terror incidents. And we've used that to go on BBC News in the mornings and share the stories of victims, which I think shocked the public to hear how little support there was for victims, how mismanaged it was, how misunderstood, how young children who were involved in incidents were mistreated and re-traumatized. And so through that advocacy, we have been able to inform the public through mass media channels, which has been a great thing to do. We've been able to go, and we sat in many rooms speaking to the press, so different newspapers, explaining to them how their reporting can re-traumatize. Also explaining how the reporting of terror incidents could be used for good rather than perpetuating this issue. And so we encouraged news outlets to talk about the stories of first responders rather than focusing on the perpetrator. Change the narrative. You can still get your news, but just shift the focus. Shift the focus to the power of the communities who come together, who respond to these. And so that advocacy has really formed and changed in that way. And we have amazingly, as I mentioned before, got the government to agree to a survivors charter, which looks at a whole lot of things like the immediate support, the mental health support, the financial support, the legal support, all that kind of support. And the government have also agreed to set up a survivors hub. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but they've guaranteed us that they will have the voices of survivors involved in the development of that. So I'm actually really optimistic in a very pessimistic space.
Thank you, Darryn. Thank you. And Juliette, just on this particular question, I suppose to frame it out a little bit, what does peacekeeping mean for you in the context of, you know, your own local situation in the States, but even if you think about it in the wider world, and how do we build it from the ground up? Because it's often obviously been said that it's just not something that can be enforced. It has to come from the grassroots. And I'm very conscious of the last comment that Darryn made as well around this idea of, you know, people being very much connected in a way. And I know that within your own father's employment, a fire service officer, and how that's held in American society broadly, it's an extremely well respected area. So just any comments you'd like to share on that?
It's a complex question of how do we peacekeep or how do we build that. I think on a global level, it's not just about preventing future conflicts, but it's about humanizing the victims when there are a conflict to make it relatable to the public, and breaking the cycle of trauma at a personal level and at a community level. Now in New York, there's no shortage of 9/11 victims. Like, you know, they always say everyone knows where they were on 9/11, but in New York, everybody knows somebody that was in 9/11. So I think there's a deeper understanding of it. But even if you travel other places in the U.S., it's California, like it's just as far away as here in Europe for some people. So when you're far removed from a conflict, you're just as distant from it as just not being affected by it. So humanizing the people and finding more commonalities than differences in people, if that makes sense. So I think peacekeeping is humanizing every conflict, humanizing the people so that they're more than just statistics. But building peace also requires speaking the truth of events and accountability and justice, because you can't create peace without the other. I know a big topic today has been forgiveness. Who is that forgiveness for? Is it for you personally, or is it for the prospect of peace going forward? And now it's a complex issue, and it differs in every place. I mean, here in Northern Ireland, that's a lot more complex of an issue than it would be in New York relating to 9/11, because it's a conflict that's ingrained in people's identity and ingrained in society. Whereas on 9/11, they say that there's never been a more united America than September 12th. Whereas here or in Spain, when it's neighbor on neighbor conflict, there's a paranoia and there's a distrust there in your own home. So peace is a much more difficult prospect. Peace in New York is more so obtaining justice and helping people move on and facilitating the supports that people need and the healthcare supports as well. And also security. Preventing anything from happening like that again. It's a massive security thing, because New York is a big target.
Thank you very much. And I suppose, Inigo, as well, if you'd like to come in there around when you're working with young people through the education system, and you see, I suppose, within some of them, a connection to these issues, what message would you offer to them in how they conduct themselves and how they go forward into adulthood? What do you try and instill within them?
Yeah. Sometimes I make me a question. If ETA give up killing people 11 years ago, 12 years ago, why I am fighting still? Why I am telling my story at schools? And you know why? Because there are still 400,000 people in my country that think that what ETA did was okay. And as Juliette has said before, we need to prevent another terrorism group to be again working on our country, in Spain, in Ireland, in the States, everywhere. So I need to show them that they have never seen the terrorism violence, to show them how many pain the violence provoke in people. And after that, we get some learnings of what can you do if this happens. And the thing is the learning we gave them, and the way to build the peace building. Okay.
Thank you, Inigo. And I think that idea as well that's flowed through each of your contributions, this idea of humanising the victims.
Exactly.
Because for younger people who perhaps are coming from families where there would have been a propensity to have engaged in violence, to actually force them to understand this is the end product of the violence, and to speak to who those individuals were, that they were very ordinary people, but extraordinary to their loved ones and all that they represented. So I think that's absolutely the case. We're now moving to some closing reflections, and this is to each of you. And if you don't mind, I'll start with Darryn on this one. So I'd love to invite you, Darryn, to share one brief reflection, a word of hope, a principle of peace, or a reminder of why remembrance actually matters.
Thank you very much, Kenny. So for me, just like we learn history, the reason why we remember is it's part of who we are, but also to prevent those atrocities from happening again. If you burn your hand on the stove, you learn from that pain not to do it again. And we should not forget these things that have happened. In terms of a word of hope, I think that I really love the statement from the murdered MP Jo Cox, and in her speech she spoke about we have more in common than the things that divide us, and I think we really need to focus on that. And when I go into schools, I try and leave the kids with one action, and that action is to call out, to recognize whenever the media or any person refers to another human being as an object. For example, stop the boats crossing. Those are not boats, those are people in boats. And why are they crossing? Try and understand that, and we'd all be in a much better place if we see the human and not the narrative.
Thank you very much, Darryn. Thank you. It's that dehumanising agenda that in many ways brought about a Holocaust and brought about a genocide in Rwanda, and that right across our world there's many, many examples.
And in South Africa, that was used on a huge scale during apartheid. So the word kafir was used for anyone who's black, and that comes from the Arabic word of kafar, which meant non-believer. And the whole narrative there was, if they are black, they're an animal, and animals have no soul, so you can do what you want to them. And it's that kind of power of word and dehumanizing people through labels that allows people to do inhumane, horrific things. And if I can just ask people to look out for that, because it is used as a tool. You see it in conflicts, whether it be in Israel, Gaza, and blaming Hamas, and it's used as a tool globally. So just for people to be aware of that.
Thank you, Darryn. And if we move on to Juliette.
I think my message would be to people is that your voice matters, and you don't need to have lost someone or lived through a war to be a contributor to peace. Peace is shown in everyday actions. It's shown in the simple compassion that you show your neighbors and other people, in the way you stand up against injustice, in just how you listen before you rush to judgment. I would also stress that grief doesn't discriminate. On 9/11, the terrorists weren't targeting Democrats or Republicans, Protestants or Catholics, New Yorkers or people from New Jersey or tourists. It killed people, ordinary people with families, with dreams, with preferences. And that's the reminder that I carry, is that our shared humanity is always more important than the divisions that we cling to. And I think that's a very pressing issue right now, particularly in the United States, with how divisive things are. I think people need some humbling of getting back to our roots of what actually matters as a society.
That theme of humility has very much come through our discussions today, and it's not used or considered enough maybe within society in all aspects. The idea of, we're such a pride-ridden race, aren't we, of people, particularly in the West, and humbling is what we all need. Inigo, your reflection?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some figures. Every day in the world die 123,000 people every day. Some of them, they die because they are at the end of their lives, or they got illness, or have an accident caused by natural causes, not by people. But every day, 1,000 people die because others kill them or murder them. So I want to give the message that we need to avoid these deaths, this murder. And I don't want people to live what I live or worse, So I agree with Darryn and Juliette that peace needs to be built day by day. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you. And final word for you, Ines? Any reflection you want to make?
It's difficult to add anything else to what it has already been very well said by Darryn, Juliette, and Inigo. But I would like to share the idea that they have been saying, that peace is built every day in everyday actions that we do. Like the smallest thing we do is not insignificant in that way. And I would also like to stress that, it might sound like very typical to say this, but violence is never the answer. Like it really brings nothing else than destruction to the victims and to the own perpetrators who do that. They also, ruin their lives by recurring to violence, because it destroys yourself. And there is a quote by a Spanish philosopher called Reyes Mate that says that killing a man to defend an idea is not defending an idea, is killing a man or a woman. It's killing a person, there is never a cause that justifies using violence. Like, you might think that the cause is bigger than the person you are going to kill, but that's never true. Like, it's never worth killing anyone for a political cause, no matter how noble you might think that cause is. it's never worth taking anyone's lives to defend it.
Thank you so much, and that's a very, very good way to finish up proceedings today. And can I just thank you all on behalf of the Vets and Badges show, and we know that there's particular output within the United States, so hopefully there will be further occasions where your experiences and the connections that you have within your own organisations, Darryn's the own Merit organisation, that there will be an opportunity for further engagement. So thank you all for your company today.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Kenny.
you
Thank you
very
very
much,
much, and to all people who are watching
Well done,
us.
everybody. I think all who have viewed today's programme will agree that we've had an exceptionally powerful group of people speak to issues most intimate to them. And we do hope there will be future occasions where they will be able to engage with the programme. Thank you.